Hi, this is Chris, and this is Cathode Bias episode 6. I'm here with Brian, known as Blue Truck Analog on Instagram. And yeah, we're going to have a little conversation mostly around vintage hi-fi, turntables, and just the projects he's working on. I have a lot of respect for the work Brian's done on basically turntable restoration and just hi-fi restoration in general. His work is like a piece of art, quite frankly. I own one of his pieces. It's in my living room. It has good wife acceptance factor. It's one of the only pieces of hi-fi that I can put in my living room that we sit in every day. So I really appreciate that, and it's a really nice piece to look at. It's a Marantz 6100 that Brian restored. So yeah, I just want to kick things off and ask Brian to introduce himself and tell a little bit about his Instagram account and yeah, how he got into hi-fi.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I appreciate the opportunity. I love what you're doing. I think that's what's great about this whole community is people like us can kind of get together and share ideas and such about what we're doing. Yeah, I'm Brian. I'm here in sunny but cold California, inside the headquarters of Blue Truck Analog, my garage. God, I think the question was, how did I get into Instagram? I think it started as a means to kind of showcase the work that I was doing. I started selling turntables on the local Craigslist here, and it ended up being a way of getting the word out. And then it kind of snowballed from there. It went from advertising to learning new things from other people like yourself, and like too many other accounts that I follow and love hearing from. It's turned into something really social, being just this. I mean, you and I've had several conversations offline, and likewise with a lot of other people. It's really helped me in really difficult times and as a means of escape. So it's been good. So don't tell my kids; they're going to think I'm a total hypocrite. I told them, don't talk to people on the internet. They're all creepy, take advantage of you. And here I am.
Yeah, I think for me too, just like in the last couple of years with the pandemic and just kind of, problems internationally now, it's just hi-fi has been a way for me just to escape all that. And I think for a lot of people, you see kind of the whole hobby kind of taking off. And even though I've been into kind of like vintage hi-fi for almost 20 years, it's kind of doubled down on it more recently and kind of even passed on some of my other hobbies in favor of going toward the more vintage route. So yeah, I totally understand that. And just I'm just kind of curious, like, how did you start picking up turntables? Like your turntable restoration seems to be kind of like your focus. And like I said, the outcomes, like the pieces are absolutely stunning when they're done. And I heard about your account from Budget Audio Files account out of Buffalo, and he was showing some of your work, and I was like, well, I need that basically. So
Yeah.
how you got started and got going on sort of these, especially in the physical side of the restoration, which is my weakness really.
Yeah, before I go into that, you mentioned the pandemic, and it really exploded this hobby and kind of went into an addiction, I guess. I started with one turntable, and I think I counted at one point, at least 20 in my house and in my workshop. It's slightly lower now, but it definitely exploded things for me. How did I get into turntable restoration? I sorry to go way back here, but it all starts with my dad.
Okay.
Growing up, I didn't really think about it all that much, but my dad was an audiophile.
Oh.
And he was, looking back now, he had a dual turntable, he had a Tandberg receiver, he had Bose 901s in the living room, he had ADS bookshelves in his study, and I didn't think much of it, but he was introducing me to it, and it's funny because he would be the guy that the family would make fun of because he would go off to some random guy's house and speakers.
Right.
And he was always on the hunt for the perfect speaker. So
Yeah, I
I'm
get
I think, but that's what I'm doing now, right? I'm going to random people's houses,
that.
pieces of old equipment and restoring them. And it's
Right.
the circle of life, Chris. It's
Yeah, my dad.
but
Go ahead.
sorry, I already told you I could talk forever. I mean, so it started with my dad, and then I got out of hi-fi. I mean, I had systems when I was growing up, but didn't really have much. Went the AV route for a while, but my wife, my wonderful wife of almost 20 years now, she came into the marriage with a milk crate of about 20 records.
Oh, nice.
Would not get rid of them. I just look at them and go, what are you doing with these? What are you doing? And she came to me one day. She's like, I really want to play these records. And something clicked, and it went from there. And I started researching and getting into looking at vintage stuff. And that's when I got my first turntable. That's when I met people like you and I are friends with the Audio Passion.
Right.
I bought my first Concept 2.5 receiver from him out of his garage.
Okay.
So it just kind of snowballed from there. I met his buddy Brent, and he taught me some things. And then I got introduced to Instagram and Audio Karma, and a whole mess of other people got me interested in restoring these things. So I mean, that's how it's kind of snowballed.
Yeah, Audio Karma has been. This is on my third Fisher restoration, third or fourth, I can't remember. And Audio Karma has been awesome, like especially on the Fisher side. So like, there's some absolute experts on like the bias circuits and stuff, and like in the Fishers, and so I've learned just a lot from those people. But yeah, I was just kind of curious, like especially on the woodworking side, like I'm really impressed by it. Like as you can tell by my subwoofer finish quality, I'm not really great on finish quality of woodworking, and not bad, quite frankly. Just wonder like how you got into it, like how you progressed your skills and on the sort of the finish quality and the woodworking side.
Yeah, don't be so hard on yourself. It looks amazing, man.
Yeah.
I've got speaker envy, that is for sure. Yeah, woodworking. I grew up in a family of computer people.
Okay.
My mom and dad were an IBM. My brother's a computer programmer. I was always the I don't know if you go so far as black sheep, but I was the one that was into art, was into tinkering. Maybe I got that from my mom, but it's always been there. And then definitely a love for vintage. I think things were built better back then.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much quantity and reducing prices. It was more about quality in my mind. Furniture had dovetail joints, and turntables were made out of metal and real wood. So how did I get into woodworking? I think it was just in a love for vintage and a love for kind of tinkering, and it just I feel like I can do things myself. So when we bought a house, it's like I started building bookshelves, and then I got into vintage cars, and that's when Blue Truck came on board, and I've got a 1966 GMC truck that I restored in my driveway and painted in my garage. The neighbors hated me, but so as far as woodworking, it was just a desire to learn, watching videos, talking to people, buying equipment, praying that I don't cut my fingers off, learning from the Audio Passion on how to veneer projects, and just building up skills along the way.
Yeah, like the veneer work you do is really amazing. That's kind of like on my wish list to try to figure out. Like I have a set of speakers in Tahoe that are full range, and they're just kind of MDF cabinets, but I feel like they could look so much nicer with a real veneer on there. So like might be something I'll do when I get back to Tahoe. I might hit you up for some ideas there. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you do this and I try to do this. It's like we learn so much from other people, from Audio Karma and other Instagrammers. that it's only right to try to give some of that back. You know, during the pandemic, you know, I didn't have anyway, I'll get into that, but I've got a lot going on now. But before that, you know, I would spend any amount of time that anybody wanted for me to share information. And if you look back on my Instagram, you know, you can see tutorials on how to veneer a turntable, right? And I, you know, spent time kind of going through all that. It's because it shouldn't be this mystical thing that nobody can do except for these experts that you have to pay a lot of money for. You know, it's trying to pay it forward, right?
Yeah, I think that like the breaking point for me to really kind of go down the do-it-yourself route was just like not being able to find anybody qualified locally in Tahoe to do my sort of tube amp restorations. I did find one person. He did a really good job on one of my fishers, but it took forever and it wasn't cheap. And I just was having a hard time finding the type of people I wanted to work with. And so I was like, all right, now just got to figure this out myself, basically.
Yeah.
And my father-in-law happens to be he's like a retired EE basically, so in Venezuela. And so I said, all right, I really need to learn how to solder and, you know, figure out not to kill myself on a, you know, 700 volt power supply. Like, what should I do here? And it's really interesting is he's been doing this for a long time. He's like fearless when it comes to like high voltage stuff. He's like this, you know, throwing the probes in there. I'm like, holy cow, like we're gonna die. Or like, but then you start realizing, like, if you're smart about it, that yeah, it's a lot of voltage, but it's if you're smart, it's gonna be done safely as well. So I think just the, you know, interest in like collecting and owning hi-fi, but then realizing like, if I don't know how to do this myself, there's no one else. It's becoming a dying trade. It's like it's all down to basically hobbyists now to keep this alive, really. So yeah, I consider myself like intermediate when it comes to like the electronic side, but yeah, I'm always willing to help out and like, you know, kind of explain, like people are trying to get into like tube collection, tube amp collection or restoration. I think many people underestimate what they're getting into when they get a 60-year-old tube amp that's 100% original and plug it in, right? Like,
yeah,
expect it to work. Right? It's not that easy a lot of times. So, but with a little bit of skills, you can get stuff to be safe and reliable. So
well,
yeah,
I mean, buying vintage gear and utilizing vintage gear is not for the faint of heart. I think when you know, we're going to be talking about buying vintage turntables and things like that, and it's like, you know, this stuff is old.
yeah,
It's gonna break, and you got to expect it. When I first started out, my dual turntable, if you know those, they're super finicky.
yeah.
They got this tiny piece of plastic called a Stewart pimple that if it's off, it doesn't work. And I'd be in tears. I'm like, oh my God, I just want to listen to a damn record.
Yeah, exactly.
But you learn, and if you learn yourself, you can work on it. It's not that difficult. And you're right, there's not a lot of people out there that do it for a reasonable price.
Or I mean, that's busy or backed up a year right now because everyone's trying to get hi-fi working. So that was one of the better decisions I made during the pandemic, was just like, all right, I can do this. I'm going to figure this out. Right. And it turns out, like, for me personally, like the electronic side of it, I think because of my background just in like software development, electronics in general, mine kind of came kind of naturally. Like, got a scope, hooked it up, figured out a signal generator worked, and started, you know, testing out like, you know, behavior of like preamps and stuff like that. Sort of came naturally. Then I was like when I went to the subwoofer on the physical side, I was like, holy, I'm out of my element on this stuff. Like this at all. Like, you know, cutting wood to be squared. It's not square to start with. And like, how am I going to fix it? Like that turned out to be a lot harder than kind of for me to kind of get my head around than the, you know, replacing some capacitors in an old amplifier. So
that's definitely my next step. I mean, we're kind of flip-flopped. I think I'm more comfortable in the woodworking and kind of the equipment that doesn't have a lot of electronics, and you're more comfortable with the high electronics and tubes, and that stuff scares the bejesus out of me, you know. And so I've got some receivers back there that I'm just going to be tinkering with. I got my scope, I got my signal generator. I'm I'm raring to go. I'm going to be hitting you up, Chris.
Yeah, I think like it took me a while just because the user interfaces on some of these modern scopes aren't great, but it took me a while to get it going. But once the scope I bought, I can't remember the model. I'll post it in the comments, but it does have a signal generator built in. It seems
Right.
for like hobbyists, it was like $300, worked perfect, honestly. So, and you can see like if if things are out of balance or something, like even on my Marantz 7, I noticed it's slightly out of balance, but without a scope, it's kind of hard to diagnose exactly what's going on there.
Is that the Marantz 7 that we found together?
No, that's I bought another one. So it's kind of like a bad influence. And I bought that first one, which was a beautiful one, but I actually found a really kind of more collectible one that was a first year production that I have down here.
Nice.
And it has like the green chassis, which apparently makes it more, I don't know, I didn't even know this. Marantz history and some other Marantz geeks like told me like that has a green chassis. I'm like, oh, it does. I just thought it was dirty. So that's real rare. I'm like, okay. So I looked it up, and yeah, they don't come up for sale very often. So I kind of
the stories on this vintage stuff and the research you can do. You could do a deep dive into this stuff, which is cool. I mean, I love research,
especially if you go like pre 50s and 60s and start going into some of the like stuff like the cinema gear. Like I have like my friend that got me into it was big into the cinema gear, like Western Electric RCA stuff. A lot of it's been sold, but he still has quite a bit of RCA stuff and like the big horns and everything. And once you go down that's a whole nother rabbit hole basically. Right. Beyond the hi-fi and into like professional audio gear from like the 50s and 60s or 40s, 50s, 60s. That stuff gets to be a whole other sort of rabbit hole. But I haven't gone down there too much, but I have to admit I'm kind of interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
So
I found my nice little niche in turntables, and I'm trying to stay within there, but it's hard. I mean, I look at your Altex in the background. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want one of those.
Yeah, with your skills on like the cabinet construction, because a lot of like Altex, don't come with good cabinets. You have to kind of build the cabinets yourself. That would be that would be an interesting project, right? Is to figure out how to build Altec cabinets, even for some of the lower end full range drivers. And then Devin Turnbull from Ojas has got some interesting projects around the JBL.
Oh yeah,
driver. And it's the boxes don't look super complicated, and you can get the drivers new on Amazon. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, if I was better at my goal is to get better. That's just, and hopefully my next project will be a little bit more sophisticated in this woofer. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious, just like one other thing too is like I just noticed you've been buying a lot of Lenkos and Bogans. It's like what are you into these days, and like what kind of turntables are you recommending for people to look at?
Yeah, I've got this. If anybody saw this post of these custom record weights that I did for some buddies here, we've got this joke of a company called BEB Audio, and it's Audio Passion and our buddy Brent. And so we keep joking and talking about things. But so now I'm known as the West Coast Lenko, expert. But yeah, it's, I think my interests are swinging more towards kind of the 60s and late 60s and Swiss made turntables. I mean, my bucket list item was Thorin's the TD 124. Right. I just was in love with it's a beautiful piece, right? It's not just a functional piece, but just the way it was crafted was beautiful, and heard a lot of good things about it, put it on the bucket list, and never thought I'd be able to afford that. And the turntable restorations kind of snowballed, and I found myself in a position to get one. And the restoration of that, I mean, the Swiss made turntable from the mid 60s, the precision is just phenomenal.
Okay.
It looks like this old piece of clunky equipment, but my gosh, it's amazing. So I think, going for the earlier turntables plus the ability to then build a custom plinth definitely is really interesting to me. So the Lenkos definitely follow that. I don't think it's a secret anymore. The Lenkos are are an amazing turntable for a much cheaper price than the 124s.
Right.
You get the same kind of idler drive.
Mm.
You get the same Swiss precision, the heavy platter. The arm on it looks a little clunky on these. I think it's the L70 arm. They can look a little clunky and rudimentary, but you rewire them with good wire. You put some new bearings in them. They sound phenomenal.
Mm.
So yeah, I guess what am I interested in these days is the earlier stuff that I can mix woodworking with turntable restoration. I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think just my opinion, like some of the 70s tables, there's some really great tables from the 70s, don't get me wrong, but I think in the Japanese sort of construction, but some ways they've gotten overpriced, I think, especially like the Moran stuff. I mean, like a Moran 6300, like over $1,000. I mean, there's so many tables I'd rather get for like that price, right? So like it's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think some of like the direct drive, like the Yamaha and Denon direct drive Japanese turntables have it pretty nice, but I have to admit I'm kind of getting kind of interested in kind of the same. I haven't owned the 60s. I got a lot of 60s gear here, but some of my electronics are newer, like my turntables from like 1980, the Denon I have here. So yeah, I like to go kind of deeper back and maybe try an idler turntable and see how that goes. Maybe a little more custom, but yeah, it's more.
Yeah, my buddy Brent, he's a total idler aficionado. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
He restored a Lenco even before I even had one, and he would always tell me that idlers just have a different pace about them.
Yeah, that's what I hear, but I don't. Yeah, why?
There's something about the wheel that the rubber kind of keep pushing the turntable along. It doesn't make sense to me logically. I'll be totally honest. And sometimes these conversations about the different cables and different systems and how they sound different. And yes, I'm talking to Chad with Chadelic Music. He's the one that starts instigating about speaker wire.
Right.
But there's something to it. I swear that there is just a pace to the music that's different.
Yeah, I've heard that before about idlers, and yeah, it's said from a pure like intuitive perspective, it doesn't seem like why would that help, but there are people out there that care about idlers, so I feel like that'd probably be my next table, either that or like what was it, the Techniques, what was it, the really high-end Techniques one, I can't remember what it is now, the T10.
Oh, SP10s.
Yeah, that's like the other table on my wish list, but I've heard those look pretty complicated. There's a lot of circuits in them and stuff, so like maybe the idlers are easier to work on. I don't know, from the 60s.
Yeah, I've got the other ones that I want to start working on are Sony's, the early Sony's.
Okay.
I've got a direct drive back there that isn't working. They're definitely more complicated, more caps, to deal with, but they're beautiful. The early Sony's with wood and oh gosh, anyway.
Yeah, I have one of I have that Yamaha YP800. I love that table, honestly, for the money. It's hard to beat as far as the quality of the construction and everything. So some of the early Japanese stuff's pretty nice too.
Yep.
So definitely we're talking about belt drive, piler. Got some notes here, just kind of looking through them. Yeah, so Plymouth construction, just like so complicated. Like, how do you even get started? Like, do you route these out, or like how do you even route like the whole?
You would just laugh at me if you saw what I do.
Okay.
It's I'm in my garage here, and it's I've got 2 teenage kids, and we've got like 50 bikes in here and ping pong tables, and so I don't have a proper workshop by any means, nor ever will. So, I'm getting the folding table and putting it in the front yard. I'm clamping down pieces of wood onto it and using the router. It's quite hokey, and hopefully at some point I get a proper workshop. But man, it's all just research, right? I mean, there's the internet is awful for a lot of things. It's a total time suck.
Yeah.
But when you start researching how to do things, it's a wonderful tool. So, I mean, there's plenty of sites on there that give you, tutorials on how to do a stacked wood plinth and how to design that, veneering and things like that. There's plenty of things out there. So it's literally just doing the research and then trying to figure out how I could do it with my own tools. And if anybody kind of followed my Thorens TD build, that was my first stack plinth.
Mhm.
I failed miserably, and I quit. I was like, I'm done with this. I almost got my finger off from the router.
Yeah.
Done. But I calmed down, took a day, went back to it, and figured it out. And that's all you do. You learn, you research, you fail, you learn from that, and you do it again.
Yeah, I'm definitely.
I mean,
intrigued by
I don't
it.
know if you know, I'm a designer by background. I'm a landscape architect. So now I'm interested in bringing, doing new designs for plinths.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
excited about these 2 new Lenco builds, and trying to do something a little bit different. And like you're doing with everything that you're doing, just trying to push the limits a little bit.
Yeah, like I said, just for me, yeah, I think for just getting started was the hardest. I would say like most work I've done is really on the tube amp side. I think just getting started was really the hardest part. Then now I'm looking at this one, I'll say, okay, I see some things that don't look right. I can probably get that fixed pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
But like my first one was a disaster. It took me like 2 months to get it to a stable state. When somebody that knows what they're doing probably could have done it in 4 hours. So
Was that the Dynaco that you did?
it was a KX Fisher. And one thing, it's a side note, but if you're gonna like do a tube amp restoration, I would not recommend starting with a Fisher. I didn't know that at the time, but now I do, because Fishers they're a rat's nest, frankly. They're beautiful. I love Fishers. And in a lot of ways, Fisher opened up the market for hi-fi in the 60s and really made it mainstream with a good sounding amplifier. But underneath these things, it's just a rat's nest. I mean, I don't know how I'm going to replace the coupling caps in this one, so it's going to be really tight. So if you're looking for something easier, honestly, the Macintosh, beautiful layout, pretty easy to work on. Also, like Dynacos, you just have to be a little careful working on the boards. The boards are very old on the Dynacos, but Fishers and like some of the Fisher Scotts, any of these 60s sort of integrated amplifiers, there's a lot going on in those things.
Yeah.
Especially if they have a tuner in them. Then they have a tuner hole. That's the most complicated part of it. So like I try to avoid the ones that are receivers with the tuner integrated, because there's just too much going on in one unit.
So have you switched over to the integrated amps and get rid of tuners altogether?
I have a separate tuner. I have both. I have one receiver, Fisher 500, which is really nice. I also have a Fisher tuner that's a separate, which I kind of prefer. Like, just keep the tuner away from the amplifier. Like, I don't need all that craziness next to the amplifier.
Yeah, I just decided I never listened to the radio. Right.
Yeah.
I started with Sansui receivers and such. That's how I've learned a little bit how to work on them. And you'd open them up and it's just like, oh my gosh, it's like everything's just crammed in there. Yeah. And then you have this fishing line of a tuner.
Yeah.
It's like
it brings in a whole level of complexity, which if you're not listening to the radio, may not be worth it. I do listen to the radio a little bit down here in Miami because there's an awesome jazz station and there's also other Latin stations I like, but in Tahoe I don't use it at all, so it's almost, it's not, there's nothing I can pick up out there that's worthwhile. But I do have a tuner down here. It's on my list to kind of go through. It is working, but it hasn't really been cleaned up at all. But yeah, I think kind of the separates for like this big system, you really no choice but to go separates, because you have to, I have a active crossover in between the amplifiers, so you really have to have like preamps, at least something with a preamp out to do it. So
yeah, I've eliminated. I just have integrateds now.
Yeah, it's probably.
I'm a Sansui lover, and give me a early '70s Sansui integrated amp, and I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about the Sansui. I have to admit, I kind of had to like draw the line somewhere, and I kind of decided like not really going with 70s receivers and integrated amps, and kind of just really focus on 60s and earlier stuff. So American made mostly. I did have a
Yeah.
Japanese tube amp for a while, but that was even crazier than some of the American ones. It was a Pioneer. Yeah, it was early Pioneer, and it was really complicated. So, but yeah, so like, yeah, I think you're right. Maybe it's just kind of like, it's like anything, but the routers make me nervous. Like routing in 3D seems like, how do you, I don't know, it seems like an impossible task, but maybe I need to just buckle up and buckle down and just keep researching. I have been following a lot of sort of woodworkers, and I have a lot of respect for Todd Graham, who did my speaker stands, and his speaker designs are really pretty beautiful as well. The open baffle stuff he's done.
That's OK Craft.
OKC Craft, yeah.
Yeah, his stuff is amazing.
Yeah. So he built this speaker stands I have, and I'm like, yeah, this is next level kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Even though speaker stands are pretty simple, it just the quality of the finish is like,
Yeah.
he did this like fired finish, or like, where he basically
Yeah, it's the Japanese finish that you
Japanese style
flame it.
with a flame. Yeah. So it came out really awesome. So
Cool.
I'm trying to think what else we got on here. Yeah, so we talked about sensory listening. So yeah, let me just kind of like, this is like what you got going on a record. Sounds like your wife. It's cool that your wife's involved, because my wife, she likes something, but she's not really into, record collecting or into hi-fi too much. She sees it more of like big thing to have sitting around the house. So I'm kind of curious, like you said, your wife was kind of like setting you off in this direction. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife's amazing. And I think anybody who has an audio room or collects, gear and is married is they probably have equally amazing wives that are understanding of this hobby and addiction. Yeah, she's a huge Van Halen fan of all things.
Oh, interesting.
And so of that 25 records, there was probably a good percentage of those were Van Halen, and so she's great. We love. I've got I don't have a dedicated room.
Mm-hmm.
My equipment's in our living room.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a nice sofa and a fireplace, and we'll just hang out and listen to music, especially during the pandemic.
Mm.
Trying to get away from watching so much TV and the negativity and all that. And it was just nice to kind of escape to some music. So yeah, her, whatever it was 25 records has now exploded to 600 plus.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
It's kind of moving, these shelves that I built, it's kind of moving out all the family photos and books and all that. And it's over. So at some point I gotta figure that out. But
yeah, that's one of the hard parts of record collecting, is like, where do you put all these records, right? Like, it's like, probably I'm up to close to 1,000 now.
Oh man, that was quick.
Yeah.
When you first talked to me, when you came down, you weren't here
at the time, I think.
Yeah.
But what happened was I bought two or three collections, and boom, that brought it up fast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I meant to mention it to you, but I mean, there's a couple kind of proud moments I have in turntable restoration. And one of them was that I had this guy call me up from Tahoe and drive his wife down all the way from Tahoe to the Bay Area to buy one of my turntables. I mean, it was a complete honor, Chris.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
And then from there, Budget talking to me, Jeremy, and wanting to buy one of my turntables, and that was a total honor too. Knowing how many people kind of follow his page and what he's doing. So
yeah, awesome.
You're one of my highlights, man.
Yeah, I mean, we go out in the Bay Area quite a bit, so it kind of was easy to convince my wife, hey, let's go to San Francisco, and then while we're down here, make a trip down to San Mateo or something. Don't worry. It wasn't too hard to convince her to go down, but she puts up a lot of weird stuff on the hi-fi. Like, I went after the same trip, I think I drove all the way almost to Monterey to pick up some Dynacos. So like, she didn't dig that too well, but and then in Florida, I've driven all around Florida trying to pick up gear all over the place. So she's a trooper.
See, you got a great wife that understands.
Yeah, so when I bought this house down here, I was like, that was a requirement though. I was like, I needed a space where I could kind of get away from the rest of this. Like one thing that's interesting in Miami is a lot of houses either have mother-in-law units or separate units. When I saw that, I was like, that's what I'm going for. Either a mother-in-law unit or something that's separate from the rest of the house. So I found this, and even though this room is fairly small, it's like, okay, but it's my own room, right? And then the other thing is like, yeah, now I'm looking into like, how can I expand it out? Can I kind of go another, I think legally I'd go another 8 feet back. And I think that'll get me to something that's pretty reasonable. So
It's going to be killer to see.
yeah, I'm hoping it happens this year, but we'll have to see with everything going on. But so yeah, just maybe one other question. Like, do you have any record recommendations? And maybe we can end it there.
Man, record recommendations. I think I was joking with you before we got on. Someone gave me a recommendation for funk music from Ghana, of all places.
Yeah. So, put a link to that into the description.
Yeah. I've got a few records on order right now. So as soon as I get them, I'll definitely put them up.
Steve recommended is a really nice sounding album. The Japanese trio. I can't remember what the name of the band was, but
oh yeah, Cadillac Music.
Yeah.
He's been phenomenal in recommending jazz music to me. And I think that's, I mean, I grew up in the 90s in the Bay Area. It was for the most part. And I was really into the music scene here. And at that time it was heavy metal and punk and so I was going to Primus concerts and Fungo Mungo and Limbo Maniacs and Chili Peppers and I got into grunge and all that. And I skipped over jazz music.
Yeah.
My dad tried to get me into it and took me to Maynard Ferguson concerts. And it was, I think that's where I lost some of my hearing, was a screeching horn.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's great about getting back into vintage gear and record collecting is now I'm being exposed to all this old music, but it's all new to me.
Yeah.
So the Tone Poets and the series that they put out has been amazing to kind of learn about some of the jazz music. And Dexter Gordon's The One Flight Up album is
it's a beautiful one,
phenomenal. Ben Webster, Soulville, that was recommended to me by Chad, is amazing and just nice and relaxing. Still love my Pink Floyd Metal. It's one of my favorite albums. And then anything Neil Young. I just posted a couple bucket list Neil Young albums, and this Lay Noise album that he did is amazing. So anyway, that's what I'm listening to now.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Like I kind of got into jazz a little bit in my 20s and was introduced to some stuff like Clifford Brown and stuff like that, and listened on CD. But then, I had to say the turntable stuff like doubled it down basically, especially you're right, the Blue Note reissues have just been killing it. Like we got a T-shirt on, right? But I got you're right. You got to, like you said, you got to kind of go easy. I kind of like addicted to like I got to have every one, right? And some of them aren't that. Like I just got one recently. It was the most recent Tone Poet. I can't remember which one it was, but it actually is not that great sounding. But so I probably would have passed on that if I had known that. But I'm like, I'm almost like completist now. Like if it comes out Blue Note, I'm buying it, right? Because they sound so damn good, right? But that last one had some tape problems, and they just got translated into the press. So I can't remember.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it has like 9,000 kilohertz hiss on it. It's pretty prominent, and you can hear it on the digital side too. But I can't remember which one it was. A guitar one. I'll put it.
Yeah, I mean, have you gotten? Is it? Have you ever seen this album, Herbie Mann, Push Push?
I have some Herbie Mann stuff. He's got some weird stuff where he does like covers and stuff, right? Like
check out it's an uncomfortable album to buy because it's basically a half naked hairy man on the cover with the flute.
All right.
And so you're like, okay, what is this? And it happened to come in a collection, but it's the Allman Brothers he plays with, the guitarist. Is it Greg Allman? Okay. It's an amazing album.
Interesting. Yeah,
that one's really great to listen to.
The Village Vanguard is pretty awesome, and then like some of the '70s stuff was just weird, like Beatles covers and stuff on the flute and stuff like that. So So I haven't heard that one, so maybe that's an interesting one to check out. But
It's definitely worth a listen.
yeah, like I was saying before we started recording, was like been kind of like down here in Miami, and my wife's from Venezuela, just been going down this weird Latin route of like salsa music
Oh,
and cumbia and a bunch of Venezuelan music. And I can get my wife into the Venezuelan stuff. So and then there's down here, you can buy stuff you can't find anywhere else in the US just because there's so much Latin influence in Miami. So like that's been kind of my current rabbit hole of record collecting, is just going down some of these Latin titles. But yeah, so
well, I bet you can get Cuban music down there.
Cuban, yeah, I got quite a few Cuban. Just the Fania stuff is all pretty awesome, and yeah, so it's Ray Barretto, stuff like that. I've been collecting.
Yeah,
Like
I only touched that. I mean, I only through Buena Vista Social Club.
yeah, that's an awesome album too. There's a recent one by Bernie Grundman that was released that it was remastered. Sounds awesome.
Cool.
But yeah, so that's like just want to catch up, and it's cool. I'm really, like I said, reason I want to talk is just because I'm like a big fan of your restorations, and just kind of wanted to hear more about your story. And yeah, thanks for catching up with us, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Chris. Great talking to you, and love what you're doing, and keep pushing. Okay.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you soon.